Okay, so this is the map blog for Africa up till 1920. So in previous map blogs and classes, we kind of discussed the Berlin Conference of 1885 and 1914. Well, not really 1914, but 1885. And basically, European states, empires, the Germans, British, the French, primarily, had divided up Africa into kind of like little fiefdoms that they controlled. So along, as we discussed before, along the coast, there was a lot more influenced by European factors, so Christianity and other things, whereas the interior was much more influenced by the native religions and Islam and that sort of thing. They had less European influences because they hadn't been exposed to them as long, pretty much. So, basically, World War One breaks out in 1914 and lasts about 4 years until 1918. It begins as sort of a regional conflict between Serbia and Austria and kind of blows up because of the multi-tiered system of alliances that was in place in Europe at the time. But the reason this is important for Africa is because all of the nations involved pretty much had colonies in Africa. So the French had a lot of West Africa, Madagascar, and Chad. British had parts of West Africa and Sudan and Egypt. The Germans, Southwest Africa, the Nambia, portions of East Africa and Cameroon. Italy had portions of Eritrea and portions of Somalia and Libya, and they tried to take Ethiopia, even though that didn't really work out for them. So, and that's important because all of these nations, most particularly the British and French, used millions of African troops to fight these wars and fight battles on the continent of Africa, and maybe to some degree importing soldiers, especially in France's case, importing Algerians to France to fight on the Western Front. So this is important because after the war is over, the British and French pretty much divide up all Germany's territories between themselves, and they get that. And after the war, you see a lot more development of the infrastructure and the commercialization in terms of railroads and steamers to kind of take goods and raw materials out of Africa and bring them to European countries. And what you also see is the kind of birth of African nationalism, because at the time, even though Africans played a massive role in the exporting of raw materials and pretty much raw materials out of Africa, they were paid literal pennies on the dollar, to use the saying. So the first people who kind of challenged this the structure of the British and French in particular were, ironically enough, those the mission-educated Christians and some of the Christians that have been living on the coast, because as they came back from World War II, they kind of got the ideology that this is our land, this is our people's, where we've lived, we would do a better job of ruling it, and we deserve to govern over it rather than some basically British and French government on another continent who don't really relate to us and are only taking out of Africa. They're not really investing anything in it. So that's kind of the situation in Africa up till 1920. As you get more into World War II, this starts to accelerate that, because World War One particularly plays a large role in sapping the strength and the ability of the European empires to kind of hold on to Africa, even though British and French in particular, made out with like pretty much the entire continent after the war is over. But that kind of sets the path of decline for their at least physical control over the continent. So this has been Matt Blog 2. and adios.